an ideal scientific study, but we're dealing with human beings over a long period of time, and this is impossible.
So there he is, Dr. Cutler, one of the doctors involved with both studies, Tuskegee and Guatemala. Dr. Susan Reverby, I want to go back to this point of the Nuremberg trials that you raised and was raised in Deadly Deception. This study in Guatemala was happening at the same time, and same with Tuskegee, which was before and went right through. It went on for 40 years into the 70s, at the same time as the Nuremberg trials.
Yes, yes. But, you know, I think the most chilling, actually, in the clip that you just played is Jim Jones, the historian's retelling of what Rod Heller said to him, which is it's just when Heller said to him, but they were Nazis. So I think that's the point I was making earlier, that it's just too easy to assume that it's only monsters. What we have to really think about is the culture of medical research itself and why controls are necessary on it. It's just too easy for physicians like Cutler to fall in love with their data, to see the larger research goals as the most important, and to sort of not see the patient in front of them as a patient, but only merely, frankly, as a subject to be used for a greater good that they think is more important.
Professor Reverby, we have to break for a minute, and then we're going to come back to this discussion and talk about Tuskegee, talk about other studies around this country. For example, what happened in Puerto Rico, a part of the United States, but the testing of high estrogen birth control, something that would never be accepted today in the United States on women there, and the studies of the injection of plutonium in unwitting subjects all over the United States. Our guest is Professor Susan Reverby. She teaches at Wellesley College. Her latest book is called Examining Tuskegee, the Infamous Syphilis Study and Its Legacy. Her report on the Guatemala study will appear in the January issue of the Journal of Policy History. This is Democracy Now! We'll be back with Professor Reverby in a minute.
When will we be paid for the work we've done? When will we be paid for the work we've done? We have worked this country from shore to shore. Our women cooked all your food and washed all your clothes. We picked all your cotton and laid the railroad steel. Worked our hands to the bone as your lumber mill. I say, when will we be paid for the work we've done? When will we be paid for the work we've done? We fought in your wars in every land to keep this country free, all women, children, and men.
When will we be paid by the Staple Singers? Here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. Today we're speaking for the hour with Professor Susan Reverby. She teaches at Wellesley College. She's a medical historian. She's the author of Examining Tuskegee, the Infamous Syphilis Study and Its Legacy. And she is the medical historian who has exposed the Guatemala study, nearly 700 Guatemalans injected with venereal disease by U.S. government doctors. Susan Reverby, can you briefly tell us about what happened in Puerto Rico, the history of the testing of the birth control pill in this country?
I'd be glad to do that, but I want to correct something from the Tuskegee thing for a minute. I really want to go back because it's actually in my book, and I think it's really important. I knew Herman Shaw quite well, and I want to talk about this. One of the things to remember is that the Public Health Service in Tuskegee thought they had a captured population, but it wasn't a concentration camp. Many of the people left the area, and even though the Public Health Service tried to track them down, many of the men who survived into the antibiotic era got penicillin, including Herman Herman Shaw. So one of the things that's really interesting is Mr. Shaw got pneumonia in 1953 and in 1956. He was hospitalized for 20 days, and he was given penicillin for almost all of those 20 days directly, and he died when he was in his 90s. So even though he was turned away at this rapid treatment center in the 40s in Birmingham, he was treated later by serendipity, and also at the treatment center where he was turned away.
Because he had another problem, right?
Something else.
It's amazing
right,
when Herman Shaw goes elsewhere to try to get treatment for his syphilis, and he's told that he cannot get treatment. He doesn't understand why.
Right, but let me explain why he didn't get treatment there, and this is what makes the history so much more complicated than an easy story. He went to something called a rapid treatment center, which was set up by the government in the post-war, starting in the 30s, but in the post-war period in particular to provide penicillin. But at the Birmingham Center, where he went, nobody who was in late latency, that is no longer contagious, was provided with the penicillin. So we don't know whether he was turned away in Birmingham because he was in the study and the government had that kind of control, or he was turned away because he was no longer contagious, and therefore when there were such limited supplies of penicillin, he would not have been given it. And what's interesting is there are two historians, and I was the second to get into the actual patient records for Tuskegee that are now available. Anybody can go look at them. They're in the National Archives in Morrow, Georgia. Mr. Shaw, I mean, other people, not Mr. Shaw, but other people went to the place in Birmingham and were treated. So I think one of the things to remember is that we need to tell the important story is the intentionality of the public health service, but we should always remember that this is human beings, and serendipity, ability to get around this kind of stuff often happens. These men were not pure victims, and there's always a more complicated part of the story that also needs to be told.
What was also...
So I just want to clear that up because
what was also so astounding, though, unlike Guatemala, is that Tuskegee was so well known in the medical community, in the literature, among professionals, and so few people spoke out, but was not well known, though suspected, among hundreds of men, did not understand what was happening to them, that they were going for treatment of a disease that could kill them, and yet they were not receiving that treatment.
Right. I mean, one of the things that's amazing about Tuskegee is there were 13 published studies of this before the press, got a hold of it in 1972. But remember, if you look at if you go through every one of these articles, and my first book called Tuskegee's Truths has some of the excerpts from all. It's an edited book on documents. And, you look at the articles and it says volunteers. Well, you might, if it says volunteers, how is a physician reading this going to know? And one of the things that's interesting is starting in the 50s, actually, physicians started to write to the Public Health Service. I document this in the Examining Tuskegee book. Physicians wrote to them and said, oh, my God, what are you doing? Look at this. And the physicians, Cutler not particularly, but a man named Olansky, wrote back and said, oh, no, it's not bad. This isn't so terrible. We're really helping them, blah, blah, blah. So I think we have to really, again, look at the context of the research and what happens in it. And that's why I wrote the book, because I think it's important to think about how much more complicated this can be.
The testing of...
But now, would you like me to turn to...
Puerto Rican women, yes.